Throughout this course, even from the very first line of code that we wrote, we use the console.log function to print things to our terminal window. And I kept referring to log as a function as part of the console object. In its simplest form, a function is merely a block of code that we as programmers can name. And once it has a name, then we can call it by its name. But it's just one or more lines of code that we put into a block, and then we say we want to execute that block over and over and over again throughout our application. So again, that's a very basic explanation of what a function is, but in JavaScript, functions can do so much more. In fact, most of this course will be devoted to working with functions because, frankly, they're one of the primary constructs in JavaScript for getting things done. So first of all, let's go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to call this function declarations.js. All right. And first of all, if I have some code that I want to reuse throughout my application, I want to add it to a function. So we can create a function, and I'll walk through and explain the parts of a function here in just a moment. Let's create the most basic function that I can possibly think of. And I'm actually going to copy and paste some code in so we don't have to type it all. But nothing here should be all that revolutionary. So I've created a new function called say hello. Notice my name. I use camel casing, right, in order to name my identifier, my function name. All right. And then I have 3 lines of code. Notice that they're inside of these curly braces. Notice that they're indented, so we see kind of a relationship between this code on the inside and this line of code and this line of code on the outside. So it kind of represents a container relationship. This code sits inside of, or is part of, or is rather the body of the function that we've just declared. All right, so here we just declared a simple function. This is called a function declaration, this style. We're going to look at other ways to define functions later, and I'll draw your attention and why you'd want to choose one or the other later. There's at least 2 other ways that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. But first of all, notice that we use a keyword called function. Then we give the function some identifier that we come up with, something meaningful. We'll use similar rules to what we use for variable names. All right. Then we use an open and close parenthesis. You'll see how these will be used in a little bit to define arguments or input parameters to our function. But right now it's empty. We don't require that the caller give us any additional information. And then we use the open curly brace here and the close curly brace here to define the container, to define the code that we want to be the body of this function. And everything inside of that is just any JavaScript that we want to write for the most part. All right, so how do we actually then use this? Well, we gave this block of code as defined by the open and close curly brace. We gave it a name, and so we should be able to call it by its name. So I should be able to do something like this, right? Say hello. And that will get me most of the way there, but to actually invoke a function, we have to use the function invocation operator. In this case, it's the open and close parenthesis, and obviously we want to use our end of line statement here. So let's go node and then function declaration, and let's see, declaration, sorry, there we go. All right, and we get hello. So hopefully you weren't expecting something super interesting. We're just printing out 3 lines with what I would call a flower box kind of around it, some dashes to style it up a little bit. We can do some interesting things with regards to assigning the function to a variable. So let's do let a equals say hello. Now, do I want to invoke the function here? No, and I'll explain why in a little bit. I merely want to get a reference to the function, and then I'll do a and invoke the variable. So this variable is now pointing to this function, and now I say, okay, I have a function inside of this variable. go invoke it using the function invocation operators. In fact, here, let's do it a bunch of times just to make sure that we're seeing what we think we should see here. And so we can see hello, hello, hello all 3 times in a row. Great. So let's comment that out. Now, up to now, this function's not all that interesting. Let me just copy it, and I'm going to comment it out, and I'll create a new version of this function down here beginning in line 17. And I want it to actually allow me to pass in a name so I can say, hello, Bob, hello, Steve, right? So we'll just create a new argument into our function say hello by giving it a variable name. So essentially, now we're able to use this variable name in the body, and we expect the caller to give us the name it wants us to say hello to. So here I'm just going to use some string operators here with name and make sure things are spaced nicely. And so here I can do, say hello to Bob, say hello to Beth, say hello to Mr. Tibbles, my cat. All right, and let's go ahead and run it. And you can see now how I'm able to reuse that code, but change it up by passing in the name that I wanted to say hello to. All right. So let's comment all this out, and let's talk about one more thing that we can do with functions, and that is return values from functions. So this first function that we created, it's merely just outputting. We're not expecting it to perform some operation and then give us some value back. But what if I wanted to create a more interesting function that implements some business rule in my system, in my e-commerce system, like to calculate the sales tax on a given amount, say a subtotal of all the items that are in my shopping cart? I might create a simple function called calculate tax, like so. And we'll get to the body in just a moment, but I want to allow the caller to pass in the amount that we're going to charge tax to. All right. Then I'm going to say let result, just the name of a variable result, be the amount, that value passed in, times 0.0825, which is the sales tax where I live. And then I want to use the keyword return and then the value I want to return. So you can return one value from a function. In this case, I want to return the amount of tax. So I'm going to return result. Now what I'll do is I'm going to call calculate tax, passing in an amount. So let's say $100. And I want to capture that into a variable. I know it's going to return a value to me. So let's just do let, and I can reuse the variable word result, but I might use something more descriptive like let tax equal calculate tax, and then console.log the amount of tax, like so. Let's save that, and then let's run it. And you can see that for a $100 purchase, it would charge $8.25 in tax. Okay, but that's what the purpose of the return keyword is, to actually give me back something. So this is an expression, a function invocation expression. It's going to give me a value back that I can then assign to the new variable tax, and then I can work with that value, in this case in a number representing the amount of tax. All right, and I think that's all that I'm going to say about this for now, but there's lots to say about functions. It's going to, again, consume the majority of this course, and you're going to have to become very familiar with the ins and outs of working with functions, and we'll start that process in the next video. We'll see you there. Thanks.